The bus groaned as it pulled up to the training compound at Fort Benning, Georgia, its brakes hissing like an exhausted beast. Dozens of new recruits sat shoulder to shoulder, faces pale beneath the dull fluorescent lights that flickered across the bus interior. Some were excited, some anxious, others trying hard not to show either. But among them sat Emily Carter, 21 years old, with quiet eyes and a duffel bag that looked heavier than she did. Outside, the late summer heat shimmered on the asphalt. The thick southern humidity wrapped around everything like a blanket. Drill sergeants in perfectly pressed uniforms stood waiting stone-faced, arms crossed, watching the bus door swing open. The recruits spilled out into the blinding sunlight, tripping over one another as the barked orders began immediately. Line up, move, move, move. Emily scrambled into formation, her boots stiff, her heart pounding so loudly she swore the sergeants could hear it. The air smelled of dust and diesel fuel. Sweat stung her eyes. She wasn't from a military family. Her father fixed cars at a garage in rural Ohio. Her mother was a nurse who worked night shifts at a small clinic. The Carters were hard-working people, but no one in her family had ever worn a uniform. So why was she here? The truth was simple and heavy. She didn't join for glory or medals. She joined because her life had felt like it was slipping into quiet invisibility. After high school, she'd worked in a hardware store, saving what little she could. Her friends had gone to college, moved away, started new lives. Emily stayed behind, taking care of her sick mother and trying not to think about how small her own world had become. When her mother passed away the previous winter, the silence in their little house became unbearable. So one day, she walked into a recruitment office and signed the papers. Now, standing in formation under the relentless Georgia sun, Emily wondered what she had just done. The first weeks of training were chaos. Every morning began with shouting, sometimes before dawn, and ended with exhaustion that made her bones ache. Physical training, obstacle courses, shooting drills, cleaning duties, it all blurred into a routine of pain, sweat, and survival. The others seemed tougher, louder, more confident. Emily was quiet, polite, and methodical qualities that didn't exactly win her friends. Some of the recruits called her the librarian because she didn't talk much and kept a small notebook in her pocket. It wasn't for journaling, it was for notes. She'd write down every instruction, every correction the drill sergeants made, every small detail others ignored. She wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but she refused to be the one who forgot. Her quietness drew attention, especially from Sergeant Morales, the lead instructor of her training platoon. Morales was a broad, battle-scarred man with a voice like gravel and eyes that could slice through steel. He'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan and didn't tolerate weakness. To him, Emily Carter looked like weakness. Private Carter. He'd shout across the field, his tone dripping with disbelief. You think this is a daycare? You move slower than cold syrup. The platoon would laugh. Emily wouldn't react. She'd just nod, mutter a respectful, "Yes, Sergeant," and push harder. That restrained her ability to stay calm, even when humiliated baffled Morales. He'd seen tough guys crumble under pressure, but this quiet girl didn't flinch. By week 3, everyone had settled into roles. There were the jokers, the loudmouths, the natural leaders, and then there was Emily, the ghost. No one noticed her much except when someone needed extra help cleaning the barracks. She rarely joined the group at night, instead staying behind to clean her rifle until the metal gleamed. Her bunkmate, Private Jenna Alvarez, eventually broke the silence one evening. "You ever talk, Carter?" she asked, pulling off her boots. "Sometimes," Emily said without looking up. "You got a family waiting for you back home?" Emily paused. "Not anymore," she said softly. That was all she said. Alvarez didn't ask again. But behind those quiet words was a storm Emily never showed. Every night, when lights went out, she'd lie awake and replay the last time she saw her mother alive. The hospital room, the sound of machines, the way her mother had smiled weakly and whispered, "You'll find your path." That memory was what carried her through the screaming, the running, the blisters, and the bruises. One morning during formation, Morales paced in front of the recruits. "Listen up. You're not here to survive, you're here to transform," he barked. "You think your past matters? It doesn't. Out there, it's about instinct, precision, grit." Emily listened closely to those words. Instinct, precision, grit. Something about them stuck. She began to apply that idea to everything. She studied not just the drills, but the rhythm of them, the way the instructors moved, the tone of their voices before a command, the exact pace needed to stay just ahead of failure. Her body began to harden. Her mind sharpened. The quiet recruit was changing, though no one realized it yet. It was during weapons training that her transformation first flickered to life. While others grumbled about the heat and weight of the rifles, Emily found a strange comfort in them. She liked the way the M4 balanced in her hands, how the mechanical click of the bolt felt like rhythm. She'd been shooting since she was a kid. Her grandfather had taught her on his farm, teaching her patience above all. "You don't aim with your eyes," he used to say. "You aim with your heart, and steady with your breath." Those lessons came back now, clear as day. During the range safety briefing, Morales shouted, "You'll be firing single rounds. Focus, control, and don't embarrass yourselves." The others cracked jokes, trying to ease their nerves. Emily stayed silent, checking her sights, memorizing the range distance. She noticed the wind direction, the sun angle, small things no one else seemed to care about. When her turn came, Morales hovered nearby, clearly expecting her to miss. Emily took her position, laid prone, and inhaled deeply. The noise of the range faded. She felt her heartbeat steady. She exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The crack echoed across the field. A perfect hit. Dead center. Morales blinked. "Beginner's luck," he muttered. Next shot. She fired again. Another perfect bullseye. Then another. And another. 10 rounds. 10 perfect centers. The range fell silent. Even the recruits who'd laughed before stared at the targets, their mouths half open. Morales lowered his clipboard slowly. "Carter," he said, his tone softer now, "where the hell did you learn to shoot like that?" Emily lowered her rifle, brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, and said calmly, "My granddad used to take me shooting, Sergeant. He said if you respect the rifle, it'll respect you back." Morales stared at her for a long moment before finally nodding. "Keep that up, and you might actually make a soldier out of yourself." That day, something changed. When evening came and the platoon gathered in the mess hall, the whispers began. "Did you see Carter's grouping? 10 for 10, man, dead center." "The quiet one?" "No way." For the first time, people looked at her not as a ghost, but as something more. Emily sat quietly at her table, eating in silence, but inside, she felt a flicker of something new, something powerful. Not pride exactly, but validation. That night, as she cleaned her rifle under the dim barracks light, Morales passed by and stopped. "You did good today," he said. "Thank you, Sergeant," she replied. "Don't thank me yet. Talent's nothing without grit." When he left, Emily smiled faintly. She already had the grit. The world just hadn't seen it yet. And in that quiet barracks room, surrounded by the distant hum of other recruits talking, she promised herself one thing. No one would ever underestimate her again. The next morning dawned over Fort Benning with a mist that hugged the ground like smoke. The training field shimmered beneath the first touch of sunlight, rifles glinting faintly in the dew. It was rifle qualification week, every recruit's chance to prove their marksmanship or risk being recycled back to basic training. For many, it was a nightmare. For Emily Carter, it would become her defining moment. The recruits assembled at the firing range, half awake, rubbing their eyes and cracking jokes to hide the nerves. The metallic smell of oil and gunpowder filled the air. Targets were set at various distances, their black silhouettes waiting to test every trigger pull. Sergeant Morales walked along the line, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the platoon like a hawk hunting weakness. "Listen up," he barked. "This isn't your video game nonsense. The M4 doesn't care how cool you think you look. It cares about your discipline, your control, and your breathing. You flinch, you fail. You hesitate, you fail. You panic, you fail. You understand me?" "Yes, Sergeant." The recruits shouted back. "Good. Let's see who actually belongs here." The first group took position. Recruits dropped to their bellies, eyes squinting through scopes, fingers trembling against triggers. The air cracked with gunfire, uneven, chaotic. Some missed by feet, others grazed the outer rings. Morales sighed loudly, jotting notes down on his clipboard. Emily stood quietly at the end of the line, waiting for her turn. She watched carefully the angle of the shooter's elbows, how they breathed too fast, how some jerked their triggers instead of squeezing them. Every movement told her what not to do. When Morales called her name, Carter, she stepped forward, calm and steady. The other recruits snickered under their breath. To them, she was still the librarian, the girl who barely spoke and always looked lost in thought. Emily took her position. The sand beneath her uniform pressed into her elbows as she went prone, adjusting her helmet slightly. The rifle felt familiar in her hands, like it belonged there. She looked through the scope. The world narrowed into the circle of glass, just her, the target, and the slow rhythm of her heartbeat. "In your own time," Morales said, expecting her to hesitate. But Emily didn't hesitate. She breathed in slowly through her nose, let the air settle in her chest, then exhaled softly through her lips. The crosshairs steadied. Crack! The shot tore through the still air. A second later, the observer called out, "Bullseye!" A murmur rippled through the line. Morales raised an eyebrow. "Lucky shot," he muttered. "Do it again." Emily adjusted slightly for the faint wind shift. Crack! Another bullseye. Now the laughter stopped. The other recruits exchanged glances, surprised. Morales' gums stopped moving between his teeth. Again. Crack, crack, crack. 10 rounds. 10 clean hits. Dead center. When she finally lowered her rifle, the silence on the range was thick enough to feel. The observer double-checked the target through binoculars and let out a low whistle. "All 10, he said. "Perfect score." Morales walked over, his boots crunching on gravel, clipboard dangling at his side. "You trying to show off, Carter?" "No, Sergeant," she said evenly. "Then what the hell was that?" "Just doing what you taught us, Sergeant. Focus, control, breathe." Morales stared at her, then broke into a slow grin, the kind of expression that almost never crossed his face. "Huh. You keep shooting like that, we might have to promote you to teach the rest of these clowns." A few recruits laughed nervously, unsure whether he was joking. Emily gave a small nod, but her face remained calm. Inside, though, her heart raced not from fear, but from something new. Pride, not loud or boastful, but quiet and satisfying. That afternoon, her name was written at the top of the qualification board. Emily Carter, 100% accuracy. The other recruits couldn't stop talking about it. In the mess hall, whispers followed her. "Did you hear about Carter? 10 for 10. Morales almost fell over. That quiet girl's a damn sniper. Jenna Alvarez dropped her tray beside Emily at dinner. You really hit all 10? She asked. Emily shrugged. Just lucky, I guess. Luck my ass, Jenna said, grinning. You just embarrassed half the platoon. Even Morales looked impressed. That never happens. Emily smiled faintly, but didn't say more. She wasn't here to show off. She was here to learn, to grow, to find that piece of herself she thought she'd lost. Later that evening, Morales stopped her outside the barracks. Carter, he called. She froze, saluted. At ease, he said, studying her for a long moment. Where'd you really learn to shoot like that? That wasn't beginner's luck. My grandfather taught me, she said. He used to say shooting isn't about pulling a trigger. It's about knowing when not to. Morales nodded slowly. Smart man. He paused, then added, You keep your head down and your heart steady, and you'll go far here. You've got something most people don't. Discipline. When he walked away, Emily stood for a long moment under the dim barracks light, feeling something she hadn't in years. Validation. The following weeks changed everything. Morales began to use her as an example in training. Watch Carter, he'd say. That's control. That's precision. The recruits who once laughed at her started asking for tips. Some tried to copy her breathing pattern, her posture, her trigger pull, but they couldn't match her calm. She had something deeper than skilled patience. One day, during a surprise drill, Morales tossed the recruits an impossible challenge, hit a target obscured by fog and wind at double the normal distance. Most missed entirely. When it was Emily's turn, she adjusted the sight, calculated in her head, then fired. The bullet sliced through the fog and struck the center. Even Morales laughed in disbelief. All right, Carter. You're a machine. The nickname Hawkeye started floating around the camp after that. She didn't like it much. It felt flashy, but it spread anyway. The quiet recruit had become a legend in training. But even as her reputation grew, Emily never stopped working. She stayed behind after hours, practicing reload drills, studying bullet drop charts, and experimenting with different shooting positions. She wasn't content with being good. She wanted to be unshakable. When others slept, she was awake, cleaning her rifle with care, whispering her grandfather's old words. Breathe steady. Respect the rifle, and it will respect you. One night, Morales found her still on the range after curfew. He watched from the shadows as she lined up her final shot beneath the moonlight. Another perfect hit. He approached quietly. You know you're not supposed to be here, Carter. Yes, Sergeant, she said, standing at attention. He looked at her rifle, then at her. You want to know the difference between a soldier and a marksman? Yes, Sergeant. A soldier fights with their hands. A marksman fights with their mind. You've got the mind for it. Don't lose it. That was the closest thing to a compliment Morales had ever given anyone. From that day forward, Emily wasn't treated like a recruit anymore. The instructors called her name differently, respectfully. She wasn't one of the loud ones, but everyone listened when she spoke. By the time qualification week ended, her name had reached officers beyond her unit. The head of advanced training requested her file. Someone scribbled a note in red ink. Potential candidate for designated marksman program. Emily didn't know it yet, but this was the moment everything would change. She had arrived at Fort Benning as a ghost, quiet, unseen, doubted. But now, her precision had forced the world to look her way. That night, she sat outside the barracks, stars glimmering faintly overhead, rifle resting beside her. She thought about her mother, her grandfather, the farm back home. And she smiled just a little. For the first time since joining, she didn't feel lost. For the first time, she felt like she belonged. By the time the leaves began to fall over Fort Benning, Emily Carter's reputation had already started to spread beyond her platoon. What began as whispers about the quiet girl who didn't miss had grown into a quiet legend among instructors. Recruits from other units came by the range just to see her shoot. Even the gruff supply sergeant who'd once rolled his eyes at her now made sure her rifle always had the best scope and cleanest barrel. But Emily didn't act like someone special. She woke up earlier than everyone else, ran farther than she was required to, and stayed behind after lights out to clean her gear. She rarely smiled, rarely complained, and never let praise distract her. It wasn't pride that drove her. It was purpose. She had something to prove, not to others, but to herself. Sergeant Morales began to watch her differently. The smirk he'd once worn when calling her librarian had faded. In its place was a flicker of respect, though he'd never say it outright. He started assigning her tougher drills, ones that tested endurance, patience, and focus. "Let's see what you're made of, Carter," he'd say, setting impossible time limits for obstacle courses or extra ruck march through the mud. And every time, Emily would meet his eyes, nod once, and push forward. On one especially brutal day, Morales led the platoon through a 12-mile march, carrying 50-pound packs. The Georgia humidity turned their uniforms into soaked rags. Recruits dropped out one by one, collapsing in exhaustion. Morales kept an eye on Carter, expecting her to falter eventually. But she didn't. She kept walking, step by step. Her boots sank into mud, her shoulders ached, but her pace never slowed. When they reached the finish line, she was among the first 3 to complete it. She didn't raise her arms or celebrate. She just took a deep breath and asked, "Permission to hydrate, Sergeant?" Morales chuckled, shaking his head. "You're not human, Carter. Just focused, Sergeant." That night, while most of the platoon groaned in their bunks, Emily sat quietly polishing her boots. Jenna Alvarez, her bunkmate, peeked at her. "You know, most people would be asleep right now," she said. Emily smiled faintly. "Can't rest when there's still work to do." "Do you ever take a break?" "Not really. Why?" Emily paused, the brush still in her hand. "Because the moment I stop pushing, I start thinking." Alvarez didn't press further, but she understood. Emily wasn't just training her body. She was training her mind to stay sharp, to keep the ghosts of her past from taking hold. Weeks passed. The final phase of training arrived, the Advanced Combat Qualification Course. It was designed to test everything recruits had learned: teamwork, endurance, marksmanship, and decision-making under pressure. The course was infamous for breaking even the strongest. It involved a simulated combat environment, crawling through mud, low visibility, moving targets, and constant noise meant to mimic the chaos of real war. Morales briefed the platoon the night before. "Tomorrow, you'll either prove you're soldiers, or you'll pack your bags." Simple as that. The next morning, rain poured down in sheets, turning the ground into a swamp. Recruits groaned, but Morales smiled. "Perfect weather for combat," he said. Emily's team was assigned to lead the first round. She strapped on her gear, adjusted her rifle, and took a deep breath as thunder rolled overhead. When the signal horn blared, they sprinted forward. Mud splashed up their legs as simulated gunfire echoed through speakers hidden in the trees. They dove for cover, shouting coordinates, calling targets. Emily moved like she'd done this all her life, low, steady, precise. Halfway through, their team's assigned marksman twisted his ankle on a slick patch of ground. Morales, observing from a distance, expected chaos. But Emily immediately took over, crawling to a vantage point and scanning for the moving target dummies that appeared randomly through the mist. She fired. One down. Shifted her scope. Another. Then another. Every shot landed perfectly, even in the rain. When the horn sounded the end of the simulation, her team stood drenched and panting. Morales walked up, soaked to the bone, shaking his head. "Carter," he said, "that was flawless." "Just following training, Sergeant," she replied, wiping rain from her face. He laughed. "You make it sound easy. You know what that means?" "No, Sergeant. It means you're ready for more than basic." A week later, Emily was summoned to the commanding officer's office. Inside, a man with silver hair and calm eyes looked up from her file. "Private Carter," he said, "your instructors speak very highly of you. You've shown consistent discipline and exceptional accuracy. We'd like to offer you a place in the designated marksman program." Emily blinked, stunned. "Sir, isn't that usually for advanced ranks?" "It is," he said with a faint smile. "But exceptions are made for those who earn it." When she left the office, her heart was racing. The designated marksman program wasn't just another course. It was the gateway to sniper training, a path few ever walked. That night, Morales found her sitting on a bench outside the barracks, staring at the dark horizon. "So," he said, lighting a cigarette, "heard the news?" "Yes, Sergeant. You nervous?" "A little." He exhaled smoke into the night air. "Good. Means you care." He looked at her. "You've got the skill. But understand something. Carter, marksmanship isn't about perfection. It's about control under chaos. You'll be tested in ways you can't imagine. Keep your head steady, and you'll go further than anyone expects." "I will, Sergeant." He smiled faintly. "I know you will." The next month, Emily transferred to the Marksman Training Division. The environment was different, quieter, more serious. The soldiers here were older, experienced, and skeptical of her. To them, she was a kid with a lucky record. The first week, she barely spoke. She simply observed the breathing techniques, the wind calculations, the subtle muscle control required for high-level precision. The instructors noticed how quickly she adapted, how fast she absorbed complex ballistic math. By the end of her first month, she was outperforming veterans who'd been shooting for years. During one exercise, she hit a 900-meter target on the first try, a distance that even instructors missed occasionally. The range went silent. The lead instructor, a tall man named Staff Sergeant Henson, walked over, inspecting her rifle. "Who taught you to read wind like that?" "My grandfather," she said simply. Henson raised an eyebrow. Well, he raised a natural. But Emily didn't believe in natural. She believed in repetition, patience, and purpose. At night, she'd write in her small notebook, not about feelings, but calculations, distance ratios, wind drift formulas, and humidity effects. Every shot she fired the next day reflected something from those notes. Her precision became so consistent that even the instructors began using her data logs for future trainees. By graduation, Henson handed her a certificate stamped with the division emblem. "Specialist Emily Carter," he said formally, "you've completed this course with the highest score recorded in 3 years." The recruits around her clapped, but Emily barely smiled. Inside, she felt something different. Not excitement, but readiness. She knew this wasn't the end of training. It was just the beginning. When she returned to her quarters that evening, she placed her certificate neatly inside her bag and sat by the window, looking out at the base lights fading into the distance. For months she'd been underestimated, doubted, and tested. But she'd earned every step through discipline, not luck. She whispered softly to herself, the same words her grandfather once told her. Breathe steady. Respect the rifle, and it will respect you. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, like the echo of her determination. Emily Carter wasn't just surviving anymore. She was rising. And soon, the world would know her name. The desert wind had a voice of its own, dry, relentless, whispering through the rocks like a warning. The air in Afghanistan carried the weight of dust, diesel, and danger. When Specialist Emily Carter stepped off the C-17 transport plane, the heat hit her like a wall. Her rifle hung at her side, but her mind was already focused, scanning the horizon, noting the terrain, the light, the silence. She wasn't at Fort Benning anymore. This was Kandahar province, where calm and chaos lived seconds apart. Her new unit, Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, was a mix of seasoned soldiers and nervous replacements. They had been deployed for months already, worn by constant patrols and unpredictable firefights. The kind of war that didn't play by rules. As the transport truck rumbled toward Forward Operating Base Sentinel, Emily sat quietly between two soldiers, Corporal Reyes, her assigned spotter, and Private Diaz, a talkative New Yorker who filled silence with nervous chatter. "So, Carter," Diaz said, shouting over the engine, "you're the new sniper, right? Heard you broke records in training." Emily shook her head. "Not a sniper yet. Designated marksman." "Yeah, well, around here, you'll be doing more than marksmanship. Hope you can handle heat and fear better than these rations." Reyes grunted beside them. "Shut it, Diaz." He turned to Emily. "Don't mind him. He talks when he's scared." Diaz laughed nervously. "Who isn't scared out here?" Emily didn't answer. She looked out the back of the truck, watching dust clouds follow them like ghosts. When they arrived at the FOB, the commanding officer, Captain Mitchell, greeted her with a firm handshake. "Specialist Carter. Heard a lot about you. You're attached to my lead patrol squad under Sergeant Reeves. You'll cover our 6 on recon and convoy protection." "Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Keep that head steady. Out here, hesitation gets people killed." That night, the base was quiet except for the occasional thud of distant artillery and the soft hum of generators. Emily lay in her cot, staring at the canvas ceiling. For the first time, her confidence faltered. This wasn't a drill anymore. Every bullet had a name, and every mistake had a price. She thought of her grandfather, of the lessons he taught her in their backyard, his steady hand guiding hers on the rifle stock. "Control isn't about ignoring fear," he'd said. "It's about moving through it." The next morning, Bravo Company rolled out for a routine supply convoy. The route was simple, 10 kilometers through open desert and a small village where they'd deliver food and medicine. Simple on paper. In reality, it was one of the most dangerous stretches in the region, an IED hotspot. Emily rode in the second Humvee, her rifle ready. Reyes sat beside her, scanning the road through binoculars. The driver hummed quietly, trying to mask his nerves. For the first half of the trip, everything was calm. The sun rose higher, baking the metal vehicles until they felt like ovens. Dust kicked up behind them in thick orange clouds. Then a crack. The windshield of the lead vehicle shattered. "Contact front," Reeves shouted through the radio. "Sniper fire, 12 o'clock. The convoy screeched to a halt. Bullets pinged against the vehicles. The soldiers scrambled for cover. Emily hit the ground, her training taking over. Heart steady, breathing slow. She pulled her rifle into position and scanned through her scope. "Can you see him?" Reyes asked, flattening beside her. "Not yet. Wait." She adjusted for the glare. Through the dust and heat, she spotted a flicker, movement on a ridge nearly 700 meters out. "There," she said. Reyes followed her aim. "You sure?" "Positive." She adjusted her scope, exhaled slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked once. A half-second later, silence. Then the shooting stopped. "Target down," Reyes muttered, lowering his binoculars. "You got him." Reeves' voice came through the radio again. "All clear? Move out." The convoy pushed forward, shaken but intact. When they reached the village, the locals peered from doorways, wary but grateful. Emily stayed near the vehicles, alert, scanning rooftops, never letting her guard drop. That night, back at base, Reyes handed her a bottle of water. "Not bad for your first time under fire." Emily took it, nodded. "He almost had us." "Yeah, but almost doesn't count." He grinned. "You saved lives today." She didn't reply. Inside, her chest felt tight, not from pride, but from the weight of that one shot. Her first real one. Days turned into weeks. Each patrol tested her in new ways. Narrow valleys where echoes made it impossible to tell direction. Dusty markets where every window might hide danger. And each time, she was ready. Her calm steadiness became the platoon's safety net. If Carter was on overwatch, the others felt safer. One afternoon, while on an observation mission outside a small village near the Helmand River, they spotted suspicious movement near a bridge where U.S. engineers were working. Captain Mitchell ordered them to hold position. Reyes scanned through his scope. "I see shadows but can't get a fix." Emily adjusted hers. The sun was low, the light tricky. Then she saw it, a reflection from a rifle barrel tucked in a mud brick window. "Enemy sniper," she whispered. "Distance?" 800 meters. Reyes checked his watch. "Winds shifting." "You sure you can?" Before he finished, Emily had already adjusted for the gust and fired. The shot echoed through the valley. The reflection vanished. "Hit confirmed," she said. Minutes later, a secondary explosion erupted near the same window, an IED detonation triggered by the sniper's failed escape. When they returned to base that evening, even the hardened veterans nodded in respect. One of them, a burly machine gunner named Harlow, clapped her shoulder. "Hell of a shot, Carter. You just saved half our engineers." Reyes smirked. "Told you she doesn't miss." Emily only nodded. "Just did what needed to be done." That night, Captain Mitchell called her into his office. He handed her a small patch, a skull and crosshair embroidered in black. "Unofficial, but it means you've earned it," he said. "You're Bravo's marksman now. When things go south, you're our steady hand." "Thank you, sir." He leaned forward. "I've seen a lot of shooters freeze their first time out. But you don't blink. You've got ice in your veins, Carter. That'll save lives." When she left the office, she didn't feel proud. She felt. Still. In the barracks, she cleaned her rifle as always. The others celebrated around her, laughing, recounting the day's chaos. Reyes tossed her an MRE. "You should eat something. Heroes need fuel." She smiled faintly. "I'm no hero." He looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe not to you. But to everyone out there? You already are." Outside, the wind howled across the desert again, the same voice that had greeted her arrival. Emily stared into the distance through the window, the moonlight glinting off her rifle. The calm in her eyes was the same as it had always been, the calm before the shot, the calm that saved lives. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The desert had tested her, but greater storms were coming. And when they did, she'd be ready. The desert sun was cruel that morning, sharp and white, bleaching everything it touched. The wind carried the taste of dust, and the horizon shimmered in waves of heat. To anyone else, it was another endless day in Afghanistan. But to Specialist Emily Carter and Bravo Company, it was a day they would never forget. They had been deployed for weeks in the Kandahar region, running patrols and protecting supply routes. The Taliban had grown bolder, setting ambushes and laying IEDs in places that once seemed safe. Every movement outside the wire was a gamble. Emily had learned to read the rhythm of war, the sudden silences, the uneasy calm before violence. That morning felt wrong the moment she stepped out of her Humvee. Feels like the air's holding its breath, Reyes muttered beside her, scanning through his binoculars. Emily nodded, eyes on the horizon. Too quiet. Captain Mitchell's voice came through the comms. Bravo Company, maintain formation. We're pushing east toward the ridge. Intel says there's been insurgent activity nearby. The convoy moved out, engines growling against the sand. For hours, they crawled through dry valleys and sun-baked plains. Then, a deafening boom. The lead truck exploded in a burst of fire and dust. The shockwave slammed into the convoy, flipping one vehicle onto its side. Screams and static filled the comms. Contact front, eyed. Multiple casualties. Reeves shouted. Gunfire erupted from the ridge. Precise, controlled bursts. The platoon scrambled for cover. Bullets tore into the sand around them, kicking up clouds that stung the eyes and burned the lungs. Emily dove behind a boulder, her heart pounding. Reyes slid in beside her, breathing hard. Sniper, he said, peering through his scope. He's got high ground, far range. He's picking us off. Where's the shot coming from? She asked. Somewhere up there, over a mile out. We can't get eyes on him. Emily adjusted her rifle, scanning the ridge through her scope. The heat distorted everything. Shadows, rocks, air. Finding a sniper in this mirage was like hunting a ghost. But she listened, not for sound, but for stillness. Then she saw it. A glint of light between two stones, there for just a second. Got him, she whispered. Reyes followed her aim. You're kidding me. That's almost 1,800 meters. Emily didn't respond. She started calculating. Wind direction, humidity, elevation, bullet drop. Her mind moved with mechanical precision. She adjusted the scope's elevation dial, compensating for the mile-long distance. Reyes shook his head. Even the best snipers need luck for a shot like that. She exhaled slowly. I don't believe in luck. The wind shifted again. She adjusted slightly, feeling the rhythm of her heartbeat, slowing it until it matched her breathing. In her scope, the target was barely visible. A dark figure crouched between the rocks, muzzle flash flickering. She steadied her grip. The noise around her faded. No explosions. No shouting. Just her breath. She pulled the trigger. The shot cracked like thunder. For a second, nothing. Then, through the scope, she saw the figure collapse backward, motionless. Hit confirmed, Reyes said quietly, almost in disbelief. The enemy fire stopped instantly. The ridge fell silent. Across the radio, Captain Mitchell's voice broke through. Carter, was that you? Yes, sir. Distance? 1,800 meters. There was a pause, then a low whistle. Goddamn. Bravo, push up. Enemy sniper neutralized. The platoon advanced cautiously, securing the ridge and rescuing the wounded from the blast zone. Emily followed behind, scanning every angle, making sure there were no more threats. When they reached the top, they found the enemy sniper's position, a well-hidden nest, with camouflage netting and a custom-built rifle. The man she had taken down wasn't just any shooter. He was infamous in the region, a Taliban marksman responsible for more than 24 coalition deaths. Reyes crouched beside the rifle, shaking his head. He had us dialed in. If you'd missed by even an inch. Emily finished his sentence softly. He'd have finished the job. Reyes looked at her, awe in his eyes. You just saved the entire battalion, Carter. That was an impossible shot. But Emily didn't smile. She just nodded and began packing her rifle, calm and silent as always. That night, the base was alive with talk. Word of her shot spread faster than wildfire. Soldiers she'd never met came up to her in the mess hall, clapping her on the back, calling her the ghost, Deadeye, the one-shot wonder. Even Captain Mitchell, usually composed, couldn't hide his pride. "You just made history, specialist," he said. "I'm writing you up for a commendation." Emily gave a small nod. "Just doing my job, sir." Mitchell smiled. "That may be true, but sometimes doing your job saves 100 others." He wasn't exaggerating. Intelligence confirmed later that the ambush had been orchestrated by a seasoned sniper team. Her single shot had thrown their operation into chaos, giving Bravo Company the opening to regroup and survive. The story reached command headquarters within days. A photograph of her, quiet, serious, in desert fatigues with a rifle across her lap, circulated through internal briefings. Her name became a symbol of precision, discipline, and control under fire. But Emily didn't want the attention. That evening, as the others celebrated, she sat outside the barracks under a cold desert moon, disassembling and cleaning her rifle piece by piece. Reyes found her there, crouched in the dust. "You know," he said, "most people would be in the rec tent drinking and bragging right now." Emily didn't look up. "I'm not most people." He smirked. "No, you're definitely not." He sat beside her, watching the rifle parts gleam in the moonlight. "What goes through your head when you take a shot like that?" She paused. "Everything and nothing. It's like time stops. There's only one thought. Make it count." Reyes nodded slowly. "You made it count all right." They sat in silence for a while, the night wind rustling across the sand. Then Emily spoke again, her voice low. "You ever wonder who they were?" Reyes frowned. "Who?" "The ones we shoot." He hesitated, then sighed. "No, I try not to. I can't help it sometimes." He looked at her, realizing that beneath her calm precision, there was still a heart that carried the weight of every bullet. Weeks later, the commendation came through, the Army commendation, Medal with Valor. She stood in formation as Captain Mitchell pinned it to her uniform. Cameras flashed, officers clapped. But Emily barely heard them. She was thinking of that day, the silence after her shot, the ridge, the heat, the stillness. When the ceremony ended, Morales, now stationed at a nearby base, appeared unexpectedly. He shook her hand firmly. "You've come a long way, Carter." "Thank you, Sergeant." He grinned. "Told you control under chaos would take you far." She smiled faintly. "Still learning, sir." He chuckled. "You always will be." That night, back in her tent, Emily placed the medal carefully in a small pouch and tucked it away. To her, it wasn't a trophy. It was a reminder. A symbol of everything she'd given, and everything she could never get back. Outside, the desert wind carried the echoes of distant gunfire. She looked up at the stars, their light cold and clear, and whispered the same words that had guided her since the beginning. "Breathe steady. Respect the rifle, and it will respect you." Her single shot had stopped an ambush, saved a battalion, and written her name into Army history. But in her heart, it wasn't glory she felt. It was quiet, heavy, real, because she knew something few others did. The world only hears the echo of a sniper's bullet, not the silence that follows. The morning after the ceremony, the world looked the same desert heat, the same gray tents, the same restless hum of generators. But something in the air had changed. Everywhere Emily went, heads turned. The story of the mile shot had spread beyond Bravo Company. Commanders, soldiers, and even civilian contractors knew her name now. Some called her a legend. Others called her lucky. Either way, Emily Carter was no longer just another soldier. She was the soldier everyone wanted to talk to, learn from, or photograph. But Emily didn't feel like a hero. In the mess hall that morning, a group of new recruits stared as she passed by with her tray. One of them whispered, "That's her, the one who hit the sniper from a mile out. Emily sat quietly at the end of the table, trying to ignore the stares. Reyes dropped his tray across from her, grinning. You know, you could at least pretend to enjoy being famous. She gave a faint smile. Fame doesn't feed anyone. Yeah, but it sure gets you better coffee, he joked, sliding a mug her way. Emily chuckled softly. Maybe I'll trade fame for sleep. Reyes leaned back. You've earned both. But as the days passed, she realized fame came with a cost, one she hadn't expected. Every mission now carried an extra layer of tension. Soldiers looked to her for every decision, every move, every shot. She wasn't just part of the team anymore. She was the team's safety net. On one patrol, when the convoy came under fire, Captain Mitchell's first order was instinctive. Find Carter. She moved into position, calm as always, but inside, she felt the weight of 100 unspoken expectations pressing on her shoulders. She fired, neutralized the threat, and the unit cheered, but when the dust settled, she sat quietly, her breathing uneven. That night, she didn't join the others in the rec tent. Instead, she went to the edge of the base, where the desert stretched out like an endless ocean. The stars above were cold and distant. Reyes found her there, leaning against the hood of a Humvee. You disappear a lot lately, he said gently. I just need quiet sometimes. Quiet's rare out here, he said, sitting beside her. You okay? She hesitated and nodded. It's strange. Everyone keeps calling me a hero. But all I did was take a shot. Not everyone could have taken it. Maybe not. But that shot ended someone's life, Reyes. I don't know if that's something to celebrate. Reyes exhaled, nodding slowly. You're not wrong. But you saved a lot more lives than you took. That's something worth holding on to. She didn't answer. The wind blew across the sand, carrying with it a faint, hollow sound, like a ghost sighing through the desert. A few weeks later, Captain Mitchell called her into his office. His expression was unusually serious. Carter, he said, motioning for her to sit. Command's sending a public affairs team to document Bravo Company. They're calling it Courage Under Fire. They want interviews. Photos. You'll be featured. Emily's stomach sank. With respect, sir. I'd rather not. Mitchell sighed. I get it. But this isn't a request. You've become a symbol. Discipline, precision, calm under pressure. The Army wants that story out there. She nodded, knowing better than to argue. The next day, a crew arrived. Reporters, cameras, bright lights that felt out of place in a combat zone. They followed her through drills, recorded her cleaning her rifle, asked her questions she didn't want to answer. What went through your mind before you took the shot? One reporter asked. She paused, eyes distant. Nothing. That's the point. You can't think too much when lives depend on a breath. And how does it feel? Another asked. To know you've saved an entire battalion? She hesitated. Feels heavy. When the segment aired weeks later, her calm, understated answers only made her more famous. The story went viral. The quiet sniper who saved her battalion. Across military forums and news outlets, she became a name everyone knew. Letters arrived from strangers, soldiers' families thanking her, recruits calling her an inspiration, children sending drawings of soldiers with rifles under sunsets. It should have felt rewarding, but every message reminded her of what she'd seen through her scope. The quiet figure on the ridge, the moment before the bullet hit. She began spending more time alone. Her tent became her refuge, neat, orderly, silent. The medal Captain Mitchell had pinned to her chest lay in a drawer, untouched. One evening, Sergeant Morales, now stationed at a nearby base, stopped by unexpectedly. His hair was grayer, his eyes softer. Carter, he said with a grin, look at you. Last time I saw you, you were a nervous recruit afraid to speak up. Emily smiled faintly. I remember, Sergeant. You've done good. You've done better than most I've trained. He looked at her carefully. But you don't look happy. She shrugged. Happiness doesn't feel like the goal out here. He leaned on the doorway. Maybe not. But don't lose yourself chasing perfection, Carter. You can save everyone and still forget who you are. She looked down. Sometimes I think I already have. Morales nodded slowly. Then find her again. The world can take your name, your story, but don't let it take your peace. After he left, Emily sat for a long time, staring at her reflection in the small mirror above her bunk. The face staring back at her was calm, composed, but the eyes looked tired, older than they should have been. The weeks that followed were quieter. Bravo Company's rotation was nearing its end. Soon, they'd be replaced, and most would go home. On their final patrol, as the convoy rolled through the endless desert one last time, Reese broke the silence. When we get back stateside, you think they'll make a movie about you? Emily laughed softly. I hope not. Come on, you'd be played by some Hollywood star. Maybe Charlize Theron. I don't want to be anyone's story, she said quietly. I just want to go home. They reached the FOB safely. No ambushes, no IEDs, just the soft relief of survival. When they disembarked, Captain Mitchell gathered the unit. You've all done extraordinary work, and none of it would have been possible without Carter's calm and leadership. You've made this unit proud. The applause that followed was thunderous. Emily stood there, the sun setting behind her, painting the desert gold. For a brief moment, she let herself feel it. Pride, not in fame or medals, but in the faces around her. They were alive. They'd made it home. That night, Reyes handed her a folded piece of paper, a photo of their unit, standing together beside the convoy, dusty and smiling. For when you forget what you did all this for, he said. She smiled softly. Thank you, Reyes. He nodded. You'll probably hate hearing this, but you're a damn hero, Carter. She looked at the picture one last time before slipping it into her pocket. Maybe, but I'm just glad we all came back. Outside, the desert was quiet again, a kind of quiet she'd once found intimidating. Now, it felt peaceful. Emily Carter, the recruit who once went unnoticed, had become the soldier who saved her battalion, not with pride or noise, but with focus, discipline, and grace under fire. She wasn't loud. She wasn't boastful. But she was steady, the kind of steady that holds others together when the world falls apart. And though her story was told across the nation, those who served with her knew the truth. She didn't fight for medals, headlines, or history. She fought for the person beside her. That was the kind of hero she was, the kind nobody expected. The plane touched down on American soil just after dawn. Through the oval window, Emily Carter watched the gray clouds peel away, revealing a skyline she hadn't seen in over a year. The hangar doors opened, and a wave of humid air and distant cheers rushed in. Families waved flags. Children held signs. For a moment, she couldn't tell if she was happy or terrified. When her boots hit the tarmac, the noise around her blurred into a single hollow hum. Reyes slapped her on the back, grinning. We made it home, Carter. She nodded, but her voice was distant. Yeah, home. For weeks, Emily's name filled the news. Hero sniper returns home after legendary mile shot. Sergeant Emily Carter, America's calmest warrior. She was invited to events, to ceremonies, even talk shows. The Army wanted her to speak to recruits, to represent modern military excellence. She smiled in photos, said all the right words, discipline, teamwork, courage, but inside, she felt like a stranger rehearsing someone else's lines. At night, When the applause faded and the hotel rooms grew quiet, the silence pressed in like a weight. Sometimes she still heard the echo of gunfire in her dreams, saw the target through the scope, just a distant silhouette that never faded. One night, after another interview, she stood by the hotel window overlooking the city lights. A reflection of herself stared back, a face framed by medals and perfect posture, but hollow eyes that didn't belong to the same woman who'd left for war. When her phone buzzed, she didn't look right away. It was Reyes. "You've been quiet lately," his message read. She replied simply, "Just tired." He sent another message. "You don't have to carry all that alone, you know." She didn't respond. Weeks turned into months. Emily bought a small house outside Nashville, quiet and far from the city noise. The neighbors knew who she was, that sniper from TV, but she rarely left the house. Her days became routine. Wake up before sunrise, run 3 miles, clean her rifle, stare at the horizon. She tried normal things, cooking, reading, even gardening, but nothing filled the hollow space the battlefield had left behind. Sometimes she'd hear fireworks in the distance, and her body would tense. Every muscle coiled before she remembered where she was. At night, she'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the dark field stretch out before her, and wonder what she was supposed to do now that there were no more missions, no more orders, no one depending on her aim. One morning, a letter arrived, handwritten with a military return address. It was from Captain Mitchell. "Sergeant Carter, the Army is putting together an advanced marksmanship training program at Fort Benning. They want someone who's been tested, someone who knows what it means to stay calm under pressure. I recommended you. You don't have to decide now, but think about it. You could teach others what no manual ever could." Emily read the letter twice. Teaching? She'd never seen herself as a teacher, but part of her, the soldier part, stirred at the thought of purpose again. That evening, she called Reyes. "Fort Benning," she said simply. He laughed. "You going back in?" "Maybe, not for combat. To teach." Reyes paused. "You'd be damn good at it. Just don't forget to live, too." She smiled faintly. "I'll try." 2 months later, she arrived at Fort Benning. The air smelled of pine and gun oil, familiar, grounding. Rows of recruits stood in formation as she walked onto the range, her uniform crisp, her expression calm. They whispered as she passed. They all knew who she was. "All right, listen up," she said, voice steady. "You've all read manuals, watched training videos. But out there, none of that matters if your mind isn't steady. A rifle doesn't win battles. Composure does." She paused, scanning their faces. "And if you're lucky, you'll never know how heavy that trigger can feel." For the first time in months, she felt a spark, a reason to be there. Teaching wasn't just training others. It was a way to make peace with what she'd lived through. Every time she corrected a recruit's aim or calmed their shaking hands, it felt like she was healing a small part of herself. But fame followed her, even here. One afternoon, a colonel from public relations approached her on the range. "Sergeant Carter," he said, "we're planning a recruitment campaign. Faces of the force, you'd be perfect for it." Emily's jaw tightened. "Sir, with respect, I'm here to train soldiers, not sell slogans." The colonel smiled politely. "We understand, but your image inspires people. We'd like to show." She cut him off. "Show them what? That war makes you a poster? That the quiet ones who come home don't sleep right anymore?" The colonel's face stiffened. "We're just trying to highlight courage, Sergeant." "Then highlight the ones who didn't come back," she said softly, turning away. He left without another word. That night, alone in her quarters, she sat by the window again, same as she had back in Nashville, and felt the ache in her chest. She knew her words had been harsh, but she didn't regret them. Heroes weren't meant to be marketed. They were meant to be remembered, honestly. Months passed. The recruits under her command began to thrive. They called her Ghost Eye, half in jest, half in reverence. She smiled more these days, even laughed occasionally. But the past still lingered. Some nights, she'd wake before dawn and find herself reaching for her rifle before realizing where she was. One morning, she found a letter slipped under her door. No return address, just 2 words on the envelope. From him. Inside, it read, "You don't owe me. I'm the brother of the man you shot that day. I watched the footage, read the stories. Everyone calls you a hero. I should hate you. But you saved others by stopping him. He was lost long before that moment. I just wanted you to know. I forgive you." Emily's hands trembled as she read it again. The words blurred through her tears. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that, not from her comrades, not from commanders, but from the other side of the scope. That letter didn't erase the pain, but it softened something inside her that had been rigid for far too long. At the end of that training cycle, her recruits graduated. Captain Mitchell came to the ceremony, standing beside her as the new sniper saluted. "You've built something good here, Carter," he said. She nodded. "Feels different this time. Feels lighter." He smiled. "That's what healing looks like." As the ceremony ended, one of the young soldiers approached her, holding out a small metal tag, a replica of her sniper round, engraved with the words, "Steady, silent, true." "For you, ma'am," he said, "so we don't forget who taught us to breathe." Emily looked at it for a long moment before slipping it into her pocket. That night, she stood alone on the training range. The stars stretched endlessly overhead. She raised her rifle, looked through the scope, but this time there was no enemy, no fear, only distance and calm. She whispered to herself, "Breathe in, hold, exhale." The shot echoed once, sharp and clean, not of war, but of release. Emily Carter smiled for the first time in years. The burden hadn't vanished, but now she carried it differently. With purpose, with peace, and with the quiet strength of a soldier who had finally learned that greatness wasn't in the shot that made her famous. It was in the way she learned to live afterward. It had been 3 years since that fateful day in the desert. 3 years since Emily Carter's shot echoed across a battlefield and into history. At Fort Benning, dawn stretched across the training fields, turning the dew into a sheet of glittering glass. Emily stood near the firing range, her rifle resting against her shoulder. She watched her latest class of recruits take their positions, their movements steady, their breathing calm. They were good, patient, focused, composed. She saw herself in them. Not the legend on TV or the soldier in a medal ceremony, but the nervous recruit who once doubted she belonged, the one who found courage in silence. Captain Mitchell approached from behind, his uniform as sharp as ever, but his hair grayer now. "You've turned this place around, Carter. These recruits talk about you like you're a ghost story that turned out to be real." Emily smiled faintly. "I'm not a ghost, sir. Just a teacher." "Maybe," he said, "but ghosts don't change lives. You have." That afternoon, as the recruits packed up for lunch, Mitchell handed her an envelope. "Command wants you in D.C. next week. Pentagon. They didn't say why, but it's official." Emily frowned. "Am I in trouble?" He chuckled. "No, Sergeant. When the Pentagon calls, it's usually for medals, not reprimands." She raised an eyebrow. "I've had enough medals." Mitchell's expression softened. "This one's different. You'll want to go." A week later, Emily found herself standing in the marble halls of the Pentagon. The place was impossibly vast, a maze of power and history. She followed a young lieutenant through corridors lined with photos of soldiers, each face frozen in a moment of valor. The lieutenant stopped outside a set of double doors. "They're ready for you, ma'am." Inside, a small group of officers stood at attention. A general turned to greet her, his chest full of ribbons. "Sergeant Carter," he said warmly. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." She did, unsure what to expect. The general slid a folder across the table. Inside was a single sheet of paper, her name, her record, and beneath it, a new title, Honorary Instructor, United States Army Marksmanship and Mental Resilience Program. He smiled. "You've done more for the morale and discipline of our snipers than anyone in recent history. We're making your methods standard across training bases nationwide. You'll be part of the advisory team, if you're willing." Emily stared at the paper, the words blurring for a moment. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said. "You've earned this." That night, she walked along the reflecting pool in Washington, the city lights rippling across the water. The Lincoln Memorial stood in the distance, glowing white under the stars. She sat on a bench and let the quiet fill her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel haunted by silence. She felt comforted by it. Her phone buzzed. A message from Reyes. "Heard about the big promotion. Ghost eye. Guess the Army finally figured out what we knew all along." She smiled. "It's not about rank anymore," she texted back. "It's about purpose." "Still the same Carter," he replied. "Grounded, steady. Proud of you." She looked at the screen for a moment before replying. "Thanks, Reyes, for always reminding me who I am." Weeks later, Emily returned to Fort Benning with new orders and a renewed sense of calm. Her program, the Carter Method as the recruits called it, emphasized not just marksmanship, but mental stillness, breathing, awareness, acceptance. Every morning, before the first shot was fired, she'd have her trainees close their eyes. "Before you pull the trigger," she'd say, "remember what you're protecting. This isn't about glory or revenge. It's about steadiness, about being the calm that others depend on." It became a mantra across the camp. And soon, her words reached beyond the Army. Veterans programs across the country began citing her methods as tools for grounding and recovery. Articles appeared, the Carter Technique, turning soldiers into peacekeepers. But Emily never sought the spotlight. She lived quietly, spending weekends visiting veteran centers, talking to young soldiers about resilience, grief, and the price of heroism. Her message was simple. You're allowed to feel. You're allowed to heal. One fall morning, she received an invitation. The envelope bore the seal of the President of the United States. At the top, it read, "You are cordially invited to the White House for the presentation of the Medal of Valor." Awarded posthumously to Sergeant Daniel Reyes, Emily froze. The world around her narrowing to a heartbeat. Reyes, the man who'd stood beside her through every battle. The man who'd believed in her when no one else did. The letter explained that his convoy had hit an IED on a peacekeeping mission overseas. He'd stayed behind to pull 2 soldiers from the wreckage. He didn't make it out. Emily sank into a chair, her hands trembling. She read the letter again and again until the words blurred through tears. A month later, she stood in the East Room of the White House, sunlight streaming through tall windows. The room was silent except for the sound of footsteps and folded flags. When the President called her forward to accept Reyes's medal on behalf of his family, she stepped up slowly, her heart pounding. "Sergeant Daniel Reyes exemplified the highest values of service," the President said, "and it is only fitting that this medal be presented by the soldier he most admired, Sergeant Emily Carter." Emily accepted the medal, her eyes wet but steady. She looked toward Reyes's family, his mother, his little brother, and gave them a quiet nod. After the ceremony, she stepped outside into the crisp November air. The White House gleamed behind her, but she didn't look back. She walked to the nearby park, sat beneath a tree, and held the medal in her hand. The medal was warm from her touch. "Miss you, Reyes," she whispered. "You are right. We don't get to choose our legends. But we do get to live them right." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead. For a long while, she just sat there, feeling the quiet. Months passed. Seasons changed. The recruits kept coming, and Emily kept teaching steady, silent, true. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the training field, she watched a new class finish their final exercise. The last shot rang out, echoing across the hills. The recruits cheered. One of them turned to her and said, "Mom, how do you stay so calm every time?" She smiled softly. "Because calm wins battles," she said. "And peace wins the war inside?" They didn't fully understand it yet, but one day they would. She turned her gaze toward the horizon, the golden light catching her eyes. In that moment, she felt it. Not pride, not fame, but balance. The recruit who once doubted herself had become a teacher, a symbol, and most of all, a survivor. Years later, when they spoke of her, soldiers would say she was the kind of hero who didn't shout or boast. She didn't need to. Her calm spoke louder than any battle cry. They would remember her not for the shot that made her famous, but for the strength that kept her steady long after the noise had faded. Emily Carter, the quiet sniper who saved her battalion. The teacher who taught them what courage really meant. The woman who found peace not in the shot that echoed, but in the silence that followed.